The next thing after it's cleaned is we need to lubricate it. So
And what are we lubing? What are we lubricating?
there are a couple things that you need to make sure it stays lubricated. The chain is one.
Okay.
The chain's a dynamic system of the bike, so it does stretch over time, and keeping it lubricated not only is going to make the bike a lot quieter, but it's definitely going to extend the life of your chain. So it's going to give you a lot more miles before you have to replace it. It's going to make the shifting a lot easier in terms of getting into the right gear. When you need a shift and you need to make sure it's in that gear, it's going to be in that gear.
Joaquin is trying really hard to not to laugh because I'm thinking of my history over the last several years, and I do recall that I've had several phone calls saying it's time to replace your chain, and I've gone through quite a few changes, and I can say only recently, having learned the hard way, have I started cleaning and lubing my chain.
Exactly.
That's why he's the master and I'm not.
Yes, so we just want to make sure that this is taken care of, and it's something that you can do, keeping it lubricated. And there are times where I recommend, after so many lubrications, to clean it.
Okay.
Because that cleaner will not only take off all the road grime and the grease, but it's also going to take off all the previous lubricant.
So we want to do that like every 10, 20?
I would usually recommend, and this is all going to be dependent on how often you ride,
Okay.
how many miles you put in throughout the week. We have some people doing 150 a week, 300 a week. I mean, if you're doing some serious training. Lubrication, you can do it, I would say, maybe once a week.
Okay.
And then a cleaning maybe once a month.
Now, and when we put the lube on it, do you want dry lube or do you want the tacky kind of the waxy stuff?
It's going to depend on the rider.
Okay.
So the tacky one, the one that's a little bit more viscous, is going to quiet down the chain. It's going to extend the life. But you start to lose a little bit in terms of your friction. So you get a little bit more, so it's not going to be as fast,
Okay.
essentially. You can go with a lighter lubricant that does the same thing,
Like a dry lube.
a dry lube.
Okay.
It will require you to do it a little more often,
Okay.
but you do save a couple of watts. So it is marginal gains. If you do want to get as fast as possible, you want to go with a little bit lighter lubricant.
So what are we talking about as far as a time differential with the different type of lubricant?
With the lighter ones, if you're doing let's say 100 miles, I know some of you will probably do a century at least once every 2 weeks. 40-mile rides, 80-mile rides. There's times where I'll make sure that it's lubricated maybe every other ride.
No, what I'm saying is like, what's the time differential? So you're saying it's faster if you have the lighter, if you're lubing it with a lighter, with the dry lube.
Oh, in terms of like your
Time difference.
Time difference?
You save, yeah.
I mean, that's going to depend on the lubricant. It's going to depend on the race. I would say it's probably fairly small considering
So
a
it's
full
negligible.
Ironman. Yeah.
So even for a sprint, somebody who's out there for 10 miles or something,
Yeah,
you're
if
talking about a very short period of time.
A sprint, Olympic distance. I mean, you can definitely go with a lubricant that's a little bit more viscous that you don't have to do so often.
Okay.
And the main thing is when we're lubricating it is to make sure that it gets into the little rollers and the pulleys inside of the chain.
Okay.
And once that happens, you need to wipe the chain down. The
Alright.
chain's not supposed to look wet. When it looks wet, that's when it starts to get all of that stuff caked up on there. And then you get the mark that everyone has of a chain on your leg because it's just the grease and the road grime getting stuck on the side.
We should call this newbies. This is somebody, a newbie riding their bike.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So good to know. Good to know. So make sure that we're cleaning the chain quite fairly regularly, that we're lubing it up to once a week possibly. Dry or wet, more viscous, more tacky is a personal preference. The time saving is pretty negligible unless you're racing like a pro level. Yeah. And make sure you get it in between all of the rollers here, and your chain should not look wet.
Exactly.
All right. What else do we have to do with lube? What else?
So from the drivetrain, the good thing is that there's another type of lubricant that is a little bit thinner, and that one is actually what I'll recommend for the derailleurs. So the pivot points here on the front derailleur, the pivot points and your jockey pulleys here on the rear derailleur, even your brake calipers and the pivots on where they're actuating. The same thing with your cables and housing. Obviously on the speed concept, you don't have the cables and housing, everything's run internally, which is why we need to make sure we keep it clean from all the goos and gummies and everything like that. But that thinner lubricant is going to make a noticeable difference on how easy it is to brake and how easy it is to change gears.
Okay.
So when we don't have that lubricant there, the cables are steel. And what happens if you don't have a stainless steel cable, you do get some corrosion over time. And when that steel cable is corroded and it's running inside of that housing, it's just a little bit more friction every single time. And then you start to notice it's a little bit stiffer for you to change into the gear.
Yep.
Sometimes it feels like you're not able to get into the large chain ring, especially when you need it. Sometimes it won't drop down to the bottom one when you definitely need it. And then the brake, safety-wise, we need to make sure that cable and housing is lubricated as well. The main thing is with the salt and the corrosion, it could bind up those pivots, and when you press the brakes, they'll lock up, and then it's kind of just slowing you down. Exactly.
No bueno. So that's interesting because I, thinking I'm doing a very good job and I'm listening to what everybody's saying, have been lubricating and cleaning my chain, but not even thinking about anything else. So, live and learn. All right. So anything else we need to think about lubing? Are we good?
For the most part, that's it.
All right.
Everything else on your bike, so the bottom bracket, the wheels, and the bearings inside of your wheels, your headset, they're all sealed cartridge bearings. So they do have a seal, specific grease, to make sure it prevents any of that salt, water, corrosion, anything get built up in there. Plus, when you bring it in, that's what we take care of it. So,
Yeah, I'm still going to go with that.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got to keep a clean bike. We want to keep a clean chain. We want to keep our chain lubed and all the other parts lubed properly. And if you really don't know what you're doing, I would highly recommend you bring it in and let them do it for you. They're pretty wonderful. I've actually been out of town and gotten them on the phone when I said, I don't understand how these pieces go together. And I really don't. So that's a perfect example of why you should have these experts do it for you.